coughing during the show, well, it's because, you know.
What if everything you thought you knew about Tiny Tim's death was wrong? For decades, people believed he simply collapsed on stage, a tragic ending to an eccentric performer's career. But the truth, the real truth, is far more haunting, emotional, and strangely poetic. Because Tiny Tim didn't just die on stage, he chose to. Not in the way you might think, but in a way that tells us everything about who he was. A man driven by music, devotion, and the unrelenting need to perform, no matter the cost. Let's rewind to where it all began. Before the falsetto, before the ukulele, before the world laughed and or loved, there was Herbert Corey, a shy boy from New York City who was utterly fascinated by the past. He wasn't like the other kids. While they played stickball or chased ice cream trucks, Herbert sat by an old record player, hypnotized by the crackling voice of Henry Burr singing Beautiful Ohio. He played it over and over again, not because it was popular, but because he felt something ancient inside it. Something tender, something pure. You see, Herbert didn't just listen to music, he absorbed it. And in a time when most kids dreamed of being Elvis, he dreamed of resurrecting songs that had been forgotten by time itself. Tiny Tim's story starts in a home built on contradictions. His mother, Tilly, was a Jewish seamstress from the Soviet city of Brest-Litovsk, a woman who carried generations of hardship and tradition. His father, Boutros Kari, was a former Catholic priest from Beirut, a man who'd walked away from religion but never from faith. Imagine the dinner table conversations in that house, the chants of two religions, two languages, two worlds. Maybe that's why Tiny Tim never fit into just one. Music became his sanctuary, his way of connecting the chaos. He taught himself guitar at 6, then violin, mandolin, and eventually the ukulele, that small, delicate instrument that would one day carry his entire soul. He didn't need lessons. He had something better, obsession. He'd spend hours in libraries, copying sheet music by hand, learning melodies from 1905, 1910, 1915, songs nobody else remembered, but he refused to let die. To him, they weren't just notes. They were ghosts whispering from another era. Then one day, fate intervened. It was 1945. Herbert was recovering from an appendectomy, lying in bed, restless and sore. He turned on the radio and heard Rudy Vallee's voice floating through the speaker. A soft, fragile falsetto, and something inside him shifted. Without thinking, Herbert tried to sing along, and when he did, something miraculous happened. A high, trembling sound came out, gentle, otherworldly, yet filled with emotion. It startled even him. That moment wasn't just musical discovery, it was revelation. He'd found his voice, the voice that would make him famous, ridiculed, and unforgettable. He would later call it a religious experience, and maybe it was, because that falsetto, that fragile, ethereal sound, would become his ticket to immortality. As he grew older, Herbert began performing in the odd corners of New York nightlife. Open mics, cabarets, gay bars, anywhere that would let him sing. He wasn't just another act, he was a spectacle. A 6-foot-tall man with pale makeup, long hair, and a ukulele, crooning century-old love songs in a high, trembling voice. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or applaud. Sometimes they did both, and Herbert didn't care. He wasn't performing for them, he was performing because of them, because someone had to remember these songs, and if that someone was a strange, falsetto-singing man in a thrift store suit, then so be it. He performed under a carousel of stage names, Larry Love, Texarkana, Judas Foxglove, until one night, someone jokingly called him Tiny Tim. It stuck, maybe because it was ironic, maybe because it felt innocent. But the name fit, a gentle soul in a big, strange world. By the 1960s, Tiny Tim was a local legend in Greenwich Village. He was part of the counterculture, yet completely apart from it, a relic in a world chasing the future. But that's what made him stand out. He sang Tiptoe Through the Tulips like it was a prayer, not a punchline. And then, in 1968, everything changed. He performed that song on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, a TV variety show that millions watched every week. One performance, one ukulele, And overnight, he became a national phenomenon. America had never seen anything like him. Was he serious? Was he satirical? Was he a genius or a joke? No one could decide, and that mystery made him irresistible. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson turned him into an icon. Tiny Tim didn't just perform, he enchanted. He smiled shyly, spoke with old-fashioned charm, and sang in a voice that seemed to float between centuries. When he married Miss Vicky on live television in 1969, it wasn't just a wedding, it was an event. 40 million people watched. It was the highest-rated episode of The Tonight Show in history. But fame, like a song, has a verse and a chorus, and eventually a fade-out. By the 1970s, the world had changed. Rock and disco were in. Falsetto crooners and ukuleles were out. Tiny Tim, the man who once represented innocence, became a novelty in an age obsessed with coolness. Still, he never stopped performing. Bars, fairs, clubs, tiny theaters, he went wherever the music would let him in. Because for him, the stage wasn't just a career, it was a calling. Behind the eccentricity, there was always sincerity. Tiny Tim wasn't pretending to be odd, he was odd. But his heart was pure. He prayed before shows. He collected sheet music like treasure. He was a man who believed the past had beauty worth saving, even if the world had forgotten it. He once said, "Music is the voice of God. If I stop singing, I stop living." Maybe he didn't mean that metaphorically. In the 1980s and 90s, Tiny Tim became something unexpected, a cult hero. Punk and alternative musicians started to embrace him, not as a joke, but as an inspiration. They saw in him what others missed: courage. The courage to be completely, unapologetically himself. He collaborated with indie bands, recorded strange, fascinating albums, and even acted in a few quirky films. But his health was deteriorating. Diabetes, heart problems, his body was wearing out. Still, the man who sang "Tiptoe Through the Tulips" refused to tiptoe around life. September 1996, a ukulele festival in Massachusetts. Tiny Tim steps on stage, smiling, frail but determined. Halfway through the performance, he collapses. A heart attack. Doctors warn him, "You cannot perform again." But what do you say to a man whose very identity is performance? He rests for 2 months. Then, against every warning, he returns to the stage one last time, November 30th, 1996. A fundraiser in Minneapolis. He feels sick that night. His wife, Susan, pleads with him to cancel, but he insists the show must go on. And so it does. He plays, he smiles, and as he begins the song that made him famous, "Tiptoe Through the Tulips," his voice falters, he collapses. Susan rushes to his side. He looks at her and whispers, "I'm not feeling well." Moments later, his heart stops. Tiny Tim died doing what he loved most, performing. Not in bitterness, not in fear, but in complete devotion to the thing that had given his life meaning. Some call it tragic, others call it poetic. But maybe it was exactly the ending he would have wanted, because Tiny Tim was never afraid of being misunderstood. He lived in the space between laughter and wonder, where art, innocence, and oddity all coexist. And even when the spotlight faded, he never stopped shining. Today, his music still echoes, in vinyl collectors' shelves, in internet archives, in the hearts of those who see beauty in the bizarre. He showed us that being different isn't a flaw, it's a gift. That passion, no matter how peculiar, is worth living. And yes, even dying, so maybe the real mystery of Tiny Tim's death isn't how he died. Maybe it's why he lived the way he did, why he gave every breath, every heartbeat, every trembling note to a world that never fully understood him. Was he ahead of his time, or just out of step with it? Maybe both. But one thing's for certain, Tiny Tim wasn't just a man who sang old songs, he was the song. Fragile, haunting, timeless, and even now, decades later, if you listen closely, you can still hear him tiptoeing through the tulips, smiling, strumming, and singing his heart out one last time.